Turkey's presidential spokesperson, Ibrahim Kalin, who's joining us from Ankara. Mr. Kalin, thank you very much for joining us here on TRT World. Now, of course, as we've been saying throughout this hour, this is not the first time that Israel has behaved in such a way towards the Palestinians. What's the international community, and specifically, what's Turkey going to do about it?
Well, as you said, this is not the first time that Israel is brutalizing holy sites in Jerusalem and violating the basic rights of the Palestinian people. It's part of a systematic attempt to deprive the Palestinians of their basic rights in their own land. But as we have been saying from the very beginning, that these actions are not only illegal, but also they're very dangerous. Israel is playing with fire, trying to change the religious, historical, and legal status of Jerusalem is a very dangerous game that they are playing there by allowing these Jewish settlers or occupiers, these fundamentalist extremist groups, into Jerusalem, into holy sites, especially in the last few days of Ramadan. This is simply not acceptable, and they have to stop this aggression, because as the occupying power, Israel is responsible for the safety and security of the Palestinian people in the occupied lands, whether it's in Jerusalem, West Bank, or Gaza. Number two, what they're trying to do now in the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood is also part of this systematic attempt to steal land from the Palestinians. What they presented as evidence to the court is completely illegal, unfounded, baseless, and unacceptable. The title deeds for the land properties that were presented by the Palestinians and by the Jordanian officials to the court have been rejected. And this court has been going on for some time. In fact, today the court was expected to issue a ruling on this. Now we understand that it's been delayed. So that's good in a sense, but that's only a temporary measure. We want this to be addressed in a legal, fair way, in a transparent way, so that the whole world can see what's happening there. In regards to what can be done, two things are important. Number one is to increase pressure on Israel by all means possible. And we've been talking to our European and American counterparts. Our president has been talking to Muslim leaders around the world, and our foreign minister met the Palestinian foreign minister, and he will be raising this issue with his counterparts in Jordan, in Saudi Arabia, in Qatar, and other places also. And the Arab League will have an emergency meeting. The UN Security Council will have an emergency meeting today to discuss the developments in Jerusalem. And we have also called for a meeting of the OIC, Organisation of Islamic Cooperation. We will continue to put every pressure possible on Israel to stop this aggression against the Palestinian people. But this is not only for today. I think if you feel like, all right, we have saved the day and the court decision has been delayed, and the Israeli settlers, occupiers, have not been allowed to enter into Jerusalem today, Masjid Al-Aqsa today, I think we will be wrong to think that this is over. No, it's not over. This is part of the systematic attempt by this apartheid state to steal land from the Palestinians, to occupy and violate the holy sites in Jerusalem, in Masjid Al-Aqsa, and other places. I also have to say that this is an aggression not only against Muslim Palestinians, but also against Christians, Christian Arabs, and other Palestinians living in Jerusalem and under Israeli occupation. Therefore, we call on everyone in the Western world, from the Pope, from Rome, from the Vatican, to the United States, to the Biden administration, from the European Union, to individual EU countries, European countries, to raise their voice against this shameful, disgraceful aggression against the Palestinian people.
Mr. Kalin, I must push you on this, because I don't think anyone will disagree with anything that you have laid out there. But what is the recourse here? Rhetoric is one thing. There has been every evidence presented to the world of the Israeli behavior towards the Palestinians, and there is condemnation. Israel is essentially a pariah state to many, and yet they continue to behave in this way. So I need to push you. What can actually be done to try and stop Israel behaving this way? This is a country that doesn't even respect the International Criminal Court.
Well, we will, of course, when we talk about the international community, we have to begin with ourselves. Muslim countries must rise to the call of the Palestinian people and use whatever leverage and power they have with the United States, with European countries and others that have a leverage over Israel. And that begins with, as I said, the Arab and Muslim countries. We have to be united in our stance and voice against this Israeli aggression, and also against those who remain silent in the face of this aggression. Therefore, it's very important that the Arab League meeting today, the OIC meeting, UN Security Council meeting, and other meetings are extremely important. As I said, this is not only for today. We may stop the events or the Israeli aggression for today, but this is not going to solve the problem. The whole world must see what's happening there, and we have to speak out and hold Israel accountable for its illegal, inhumane actions and treatment of the Palestinian people. So we have been talking to Europeans and Americans that have, as I said, leverage over Israel, but also other Muslim countries that, say, for example, entered the process of normalizing relations with Israel recently. They have to act. They have to speak out against this aggression. And we will be talking, our president has been following this process, and we will continue to support the Palestinians by all means possible in their rightful fight against this aggression. It is really important. Put pressure on Israel and support the Palestinians by all means possible.
Of course, and that leverage with the Americans and the Europeans will be necessary. But I do wonder, you mentioned it there, the sort of normalization of relations with Israel and a couple of Arab states. How disappointed were Turkey and the Arab world more broadly that that normalization happened, especially in light of what is happening right now?
Look, we've made it very clear that as sovereign countries, any country is free and entitled to make a decision about normalizing relations with any other country. It's not up to us to say that. But when you do this, you have to make sure that you protect the rights of the Palestinians at the same time. If you are going to engage Israel, do it for the sake of the Palestinians. If you're going to have diplomatic relations, that's fine. We don't have a problem with that. But do it also to protect the Palestinian people, the Palestinian lands, which, by the way, belong not only to the Palestinians, but to the whole Muslim world. And as I said, there are sacred sites, shrines there that belong to the Christians. Therefore, what Israelis are doing, what the settlers, so-called settlers, which I call the occupiers, are doing is attacking all Muslim and Christian holy sites, but also I think they're being a disgrace to the other Jews who do not agree with this Zionist plan and policy, who abhor what's happening to the Palestinians, who criticize the Israeli government. I know they've been speaking out, other Jews around the world, in Israel as well as in other parts of the world. They have to speak out today. And we have to join our voices on our efforts to increase pressure on Israel. As I said, two important gains, if you like, for today are the fact that the court decision has been delayed as a result of this protests and pressure. That's good. And number two, this extremist Israeli settlers, occupiers have not been allowed to enter Jerusalem today. That's fine. But as I said, we have to think in the long term here. What we have to do today, tomorrow, next month, next year is critical to protect the Palestinians and the Palestinian lands. Otherwise, Israel, these actions by Israel will lead to more violence, more bloodshed, and Israel bears sole responsibility for what happens in Jerusalem today and tomorrow.
I'm sorry to rush you, Mr. Kalin, but we are running out of time. We've only got less than a minute and a half left. So I do want to push you on this final question. What supports do you think is necessary to give to the Palestinian political process? As we've been mentioning throughout this show, that has been completely undermined, not only by the Israelis, but also by the infighting between the two Palestinian political parties. What support do you think the international community can bring to those elements?
Well, first of all, hold Israel accountable for what it claims to believe in, that is the two-state solution. If the current Israeli government, state apparatus, really believes in the two-state solution, then they must act according to that. Number two, they're preventing the Palestinians from holding elections in their own land. Israel likes to present and promote itself and market itself as the only democracy in the Middle East, when in fact for the last 15 years it's Israel that has been undermining, blocking all democratic electoral processes in the Palestinian lands. This is another result of this attempt to present the Palestinians as having no connection to democracy or elections. The Palestinians themselves have been wanting to hold elections. It's the Israelis, it's the Israeli government and their occupation policies that are preventing them from holding elections. Now, one particular issue I think the whole world must know is that the reason why the Palestinian Authority had to cancel the elections that were scheduled for May 22nd is the Israeli decision not to allow any Palestinian residents of Jerusalem to go and vote in person. How can you do that? On what basis, with what right do you prevent the Palestinians themselves from holding elections and going to vote to the ballot boxes in their own land? So they talk about democracy, they talk about human rights, they talk about human dignity. They should look at what Israel is doing to the Palestinians in their own land. And they should be ashamed of themselves if they don't raise a voice.
Okay, Ibrahim Kalin, Turkey's presidential spokesperson, thank you very much for being with us here on TRT World.